Thank you, Father, for this wonderful opportunity to discuss your word and to have this celebration, the Feast of Sukkot, during the Shemitah here. Father, be with us today. Help us to understand and show us what you want to show from your word, and lay on our hearts the things that you want us to know for preparing for your coming. I ask it all in the mighty name of Yeshua Mashiach. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so this feast is similar to last week, where we had Yom Kippur theme overlaid with a Torah portion, and this week I decided to do the same. So we're going to look at the last Torah portion of the year, which is Vazot HaBrachah, overlaid with the teaching of Sukkot. And it's quite fascinating if you overlay the two things. They sort of frame it in a certain thought process, and I think that's really relevant, because this is the last Torah portion. We're doing the last festival in the fall festival seasons for this year in relation to end times. So we've got three themes that basically support one another, and on top of that, it's a Shemitah here. So that really emphasizes things, which I think is quite fascinating. The other thing that I saw that I'm probably going to elaborate on, I've highlighted some Hebrew letters there. So you can see the patterns. You automatically can see the Aleph Taf in Vazot on the top left. And HaBrachah, you can see a Hey in front, a Hey at the back with Baruch or Barach in the middle. And then you get Sukkot with the two Vavs in the middle. So you can see the symmetry and the patterns within the Hebrew letters. So I'm going to explain a few interesting things regarding that. Stepping into the theme. So it's basically a very short Torah portion. It's about Moses blessing the Israelites, Moses ascending to Mount Nebo where he died, and then also the blessing of the 12 tribes. Now, the previous Torah portion cycle I did was, 2-3 years back. That's where I elaborated on the blessings over every one of the 12 tribes. So I'm not going to touch on that because of the theme of Sukkot on top of this Torah portion, basically focus it on something else. But what I want to emphasize, which I deem is very important for us to rightfully interpret Scripture, we need to keep in mind that Hebrew is Yahweh's culture. The Torah is written in Hebrew language. And within the Hebrew language, there's some things within the language that we need to understand in order to interpret the word the right way. And the thing I want to emphasize today is the concept of cycles. We've touched on cycles, repeating cycles, cleansing cycles, and all of that. And then we also know the Torah cycle. But what I want to emphasize is this cycle of time. In Hebraic thought, time is cyclical, it's not linear. So if Yahweh says eternity, and we think from a physical point of view, yes, we can think, it's going to be billions and billions and billions of years in the future. But from a spiritual point of view, that's totally different. And we need to think about those things. The other thing that we need to understand is that Yahweh works through cycles. Everything he does is cyclical. And what I'm going to do in this Torah portion, I'm going to connect last Torah portion with this Torah portion as well as the next one. So we can emphasize or put the three links together so we can keep this Torah cycle intact. I don't want to break the cycle necessarily. And honoring that, I'm going to keep the theme going from last week, this week, flowing into next week. So we're going to look at the same themes flowing into Beresheeth, because I think that's the true essence of understanding Scripture. And we had a question from Asher last week that we briefly discussed. I've created 2 slides on that. So we can look at that from the point of view of the cyclical nature of Scripture and the interpretation of that.
Tell me what the question was.
No, I don't know what the question was. That was about Revelation.
Yes.
About the last judgment and those things, and the people outside the city and lake of fire and those things. So I've done a bit of a study this morning on that, just to put things into perspective from the cyclical perspective, so we don't break the chain, so to speak, and then we can continue the cycle and the cycle of time, as well as the cleansing cycle concept that we're already understanding from our studies. Might be difficult for some people to understand if they're used to a linear time frame or a linear way of thinking regarding Yahweh's work. If you just think about the feast cycles, there's 7 festivals every year, and they repeat every year. Why? Why don't we only have 1 year with 7 festivals in it, and then that's it? And you don't have to worry about it. You can just read about it. We don't have to fully integrate with it. We don't have to adhere to the timing or be aware of the timing within our time frame. But as we discovered this year specifically, is that the Torah cycles are in sync with real-time events, with where we are currently at on a personal, spiritual, as well as prophetic pattern. So that's why I want to honor the festivals in the same way, as well as the themes that we're looking at, which is a larger theme that's basically weaved throughout the Torah cycle. And now we're overlaying the festival cycle on top of that to give it more support and strength, to really underline the message. So the main theme we're going to look at today is continuing on with last week's theme, which is the 7th millennium. The reason for that is we are in the 7th month. We are celebrating the 7th festival. And all of those number 7s align with the prophetic as well as what is to come in regards to the 7th millennium. So we're going to continue that conversation, and we're also going to dabble into the 8th day, which is also part of this feast, but it's actually a festival on its own, where the turn back of the Torah happens on that day, and then we start the cycle of Beresheeth, and then we start the new Torah cycle. So we're also going to step into the 8th millennium slightly, so you can see where I'm going with this. And then we're going to overlay the idea of Beresheeth with the 8th millennium, which is the theme of creation. And you're going to see why I say that when I get there. So I'm not going to spill the beans, so to speak. Let's get into it. I've highlighted where we are today. We're on the 3rd day after the Feast of Sukkot, after the full moon on Wednesday evening. The first day was Thursday, and the 7th day will be the 29th, next Wednesday. At evening, the 8th day will start, which will be Thursday. So that's the theme or the rest of this Sukkot feast cycle, as well as the 8th day. This is where we are currently at, orange arrow. We are entering Sukkot. We've done Yom Kippur, and we are moving into the theme. So we are going to look at Sukkot from the perspective of Yom Kippur, moving from one into the other as well, and also the concept of the harvest, which is about one of the themes of Sukkot and one of the names of Sukkot. Quickly recap, just want to re-emphasize, the 7th millennium is the great eclipse, the eclipse of the physical and the spiritual, where the two realms overlap, and those two realms don't like one another. So there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of energy and negative energy and things flowing in order to bring things back to the original. So Yahweh's blueprint of the spiritual is stronger than the physical that is weak, that's been distorted. So when the overlaying of the spiritual with the physical happens, the physical will realign and adjust to the original. So that's the intent of the overlaying of the two, or Yeshua's return. You can also see it as that. He's here to set things right, to restore it according to the feast pattern, which highlights the work of Mashiach. And his work is to finish Beresheeth, the creation process, but in this case, the recreation process or the restoration process after the fall of man. So that's the high level idea. What I do want to highlight here is the idea of the goldsmith that is part of the gematria of number 380, which is part of desolation, which relates to one of the signs that will happen and appear during the time of the Great Tribulation. The abomination of desolation will start the process of getting those forces overlaying, and then all the conflict with the final battle happening. And as a result of that, there's the goldsmith concept that we looked on at last time, which is about the purification and refinement process within Yahweh's cleansing cycles. We're also going to look at the idea of the great birth, which is Yom Kippur, and then the great harvest is what is following, which is the theme of Sukkot. It's the harvest festival. It's one of the pilgrim festivals. We looked last week on this one. This is very fundamental pillar to understand specifically the two words, brimstone and torture, and also the concept of fire. Now, fire, from a physical perspective, is dangerous. From a spiritual perspective, it just means light, heat, and purification and energy. Daniel and his friends experienced the fire from a spiritual perspective. It did them no harm. But in the physical, those who threw them in the furnace, they were destroyed by it. So it's dangerous to be in contact with the spiritual things, which is Yahweh's foundational things. That's what we learned when we studied the menorah and the word for fire. And that signifies Yahweh's character or his attributes. He's a consuming fire, which is an attribute of his power and his holiness. So keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to revisit that. So brimstone is about the presence of Yahweh and the divinity of Yahweh. That's the essence and the foundational concept of that word theon, which is connected to theos. And it has to do with purification and to ward off disease. It's about expelling anything that is not part of the original plan. So any defilement or anything that bring illness or disease will be destroyed. But the person who is being defiled by whatever, or being made sick by any disease or any spiritual negative connotation, they will be purified through this process. It's not about destroying the person, it's about healing the person and releasing the person from that bondage. Any comments on those basic ideas we discussed last week? All right, so let's carry on. I'm not going to touch on this one. It's basically what we discussed. The only thing I want to highlight here at the bottom there is the number 1600, which is the gematria that means city of forests. And that has to do with the winepress and the blood as high as the hoarder's bridle. That's the measure of height. And the blood, of course, is the wine, the pressing of the grapes that we looked at last week as well. To sum it up, I've just updated this slide today just to emphasize a few things I want to compare to make you aware of where we're at. So Sukkot, we can call the 7th millennium the Great Sukkot in context of the city of the forests, which has to do with the meaning of Sukkot, or the purpose of Sukkot, specifically the 7 days and the 8th day, because that's the time it takes to rededicate the temple. So when Solomon's temple was rededicated, it was rededicated on a Sukkot. The Feast of Hanukkah is 8 days. It's actually a delayed Sukkot. It's about rededication of the temple. Now, during the millennium, there will be a temple built, which is the 3rd temple. So there will be a rededication of the temple taking place as well, which aligns with the theme of Sukkot, which is the Great Sukkot, which is 1,000 years. On the other side of that, we see the city of crystal on the top left, which is the New Jerusalem or the New Temple. And there will be a rededication of that temple, which is the theme of Sukkot, which is the rededication of the final temple. Then within Sukkot, we have an harvest. Now, Yom Kippur, I refer to the great harvest, and Sukkot, I call the greater harvest. And it has to do with the nations that will come in. So I believe there's nations that will come in, and we will see that in the book of Revelation. You also see that in the book of Zechariah, that there will be people, there will be nations who will come to faith. And one verse in Revelation say, you won't be able to number them. That's Revelation 7. So there is going to be a harvest, and it's the harvest of the nations. And that is also one of the names of the Feast of Sukkot. It's the harvest feast, or the Feast of Ingathering, and also the Feast of the Nations. So that just gives us the context of where we are at in regards to the millennial cycle, which is every 1,000 years from 1,000 to 7,000. And then we're going to move into the 8th day, or the 8th millennium, where the whole cycle will start again. And the first festival within that cycle will be a Passover that will need a fourth cup that hasn't been celebrated at Passover when Yeshua was present. And he said, I will drink the fourth cup in the kingdom. And I believe he will drink that cup in the 8th millennium on the first Passover on that 8th day, or the first day of the next cycle. And that cup, in a previous study, we did the theme of Passover. It's actually a wedding feast. When you do the Passover with that theme, it gets its full essence. So I believe that first Passover in the 8th millennium will be the wedding feast of the bride and the groom, who is Mashiach. And the reason I'm saying that, because then the kingdom would have been established. The city will have come down by that time. And what a better place to hold the wedding feast inside the city and not outside where there's nothing and everything's destroyed. Remember, a wedding is, everything is about preparation. You have to even get the place ready to celebrate. So the place is only ready after the city comes down from heaven. And it comes down and it calls it the bride, also coming down with the city. And that is where the feast will be celebrated in time, in sync with his Moedim, which is a continuation of the cycles, as I mentioned earlier. So can you see how the cycles come into play, how you can overlay the festivals with the millennia, with the themes of the prophetic picture of the bride and the groom, and everything need to be in sync with the Moedim, even on a larger scale. And even more so in a larger scale, because it's from a spiritual perspective. For us, 1,000 years is long. For Yahweh, it's a moment. So from his perspective, it does not matter. For us, we can't get our heads around it because 1,000 years sound too long. Because what do you call it?
We think linear.
We think linear, and we only have a lifespan of 120 years, so we can't even comprehend those concepts. All right. We looked at what I just said with the 8th millennium and the 7th millennium being 1,000 years Shavuot. I'm not going to go back to that, so those who have the notes, you can go back to it. So starting with this Torah portion, the Torah portion's name is Vazot HaBrachah. That means, and this is the blessing. Deuteronomy 33 verse 1. And this is the blessing that Moshe, the man of Elohim, blessed the children of Israel before his death. Now, from a prophetic perspective, if you overlay this verse with where we're at the 7th millennium moving into the 8th millennium, it means that the blessing that you will receive as part of the household of Israel will only come to pass in the 8th millennium, because that's our prophetic time frame. And that blessing is not relevant for us in this day. It's only relevant in the larger perspective. And the blessing, as we discussed previously, is a result and consequence of keeping the Torah and the commandments as given to Abraham, and the promise that was given to him was that so that all the families of the earth can be blessed. So who are all the families of the earth? Is it only during the time of Abraham's life? No, it's all the families over all millennia will be blessed. Now Yahweh made that statement that all the families over all the time frames at the point in time entering into the 8th millennium, because that's the time frame what we're looking at prophetically, will be blessed. So that means that he will keep on doing whatever he needs to do to fulfill this promise he made to Abraham that is timeless. So we need to take Yahweh serious at his word, and that's what I'm going to highlight today, looking at those concepts that is found in Revelation that people sometimes pull a bit out of shape because they don't understand the cyclical nature of Yahweh's word. They don't understand the meaning of the words that is used within the Greek, and applying the same techniques that you apply to the Hebrew, I applied them to the Greek to get to what is behind that word, what's the true essence of that word, because we just jump to the simple explanation and then we miss the mark completely. So I'm not going to give that one away yet. So hang in there. So looking at this word, havazot, baracha, and this is the blessing. Ha'avazot, you can see the vav, the Zion, which is the blue letter there, and then aleph taf. Immediately, you guys who are familiar with it, we see the aleph taf, which is a Mashiach. He's on the left. He's got a sword, and there's a vav. He is a man, but the man comes from the spiritual. So now we see the context of that within the context of the meaning of those letters and those words. I reformulated that in my own words as if I am translating those letters, the meaning of those letters in relation to where they are at in the word, and this is what it sounds like. And this is the one who come from the spiritual realm in the form of man, who holds the sword and the word of Yahweh, the Torah. He is the one who will be revealed to the world and the nations as the beginning and the end, the first and the last, the Mashiach and the King. Through him you will receive the blessing. So that's the way I interpreted the name of this Torah portion with the meaning of the letters and where they are situated. And that still rings true. So anyone want to make a comment on that or want to ask a question? Does it make sense? All right, so Vahazot, Gematria 414, and then we see enchanter, Nachashon, mocking. And then we see the concept of judgment or separation, which is to strike, to cut away, flame of fire, utterance, grief, heaviness, and sorrow. And as a result of that, we see lowly meditation, holy, separate laughter, brightness of him. And we know when Mashiach comes, he comes in the brightness of his coming. And those who are lowly, those who are humble, and who meditate on his word, and who become holy, who separate themselves from this world, they will be the ones like Yitzhak. They will be laughing. They will be full of joy and rejoicing because of their salvation, because the Nachash, the enchanter, will be cut off, will be separate from them, and he will be cast in the flame of fire. So we're going to look at that at the end of the study as well, the casting of the serpent, the false prophet, and the beast in the lake of fire, and also those with him. And what does that mean? So the Nachash is the serpent. He is the one that will receive the judgment, and this time frame is after the final battle at the end of the 7th millennium, prior to beginning of the 8th millennium. So he will be bound, he will be released, he will deceive the nations, And that's where I come from in Revelation as well as in Zechariah 14. There will be nations, and it actually states that you can't number them. And they come from the four corners of the earth to come and do the battle of Gog and Magog, and against the holy ones of Yahweh, which are the other half of the nations that exist in the time frame of the 7th millennium or the 1,000 years Sukkot. So that's where that idea comes from. It's backed up by scripture, and Yahweh will come and judge him and then separate him, and to separate the people who are holy, who are inside the city, and those who are on the outside, who were deceived by him, they will be cut off and also be cast in a flame of fire. And we're going to look at what that means at the end. Looking at the other word, HaBrachah, we've got two hays. Immediately going through this Torah portion, what we learned, two hays, two tablets, 10 commandments. 10 commandments with the rod of Aaron and the manna, Yahweh's name, inside the Ark of the Covenant, which is Yahweh's character and his destiny for his people. So that's just the two hays that give us the hint. So we see the protection of the two tablets. Within that is Barach or Baruch, Barak, that means to bless, but also to kneel and to cause to kneel. Isn't that an interesting way to describe that? If I cause someone to kneel, it seems like they do not want to kneel, and I do something that will cause them to kneel. And then there's others that will kneel voluntary. They will do it by themselves, and they will bless Yahweh. And in this case, it means that you will kneel before Yahweh and bless him. People normally see this word, I'm going to be blessed. Yahweh's going to bless me. No, it's not about you being blessed. It's about you bowing the knee and you worshiping Yahweh. And every knee will bow, every tongue will confess, and he will cause those to kneel before him, even those who don't want to, through circumstances and things that will happen that we already discussed last week, looking at the 7th millennium as a Sukkot, but also as the winepress. And we're going to find some things regarding the 8th millennium in this study, and going to see what that looks like. Is there another cycle that will cause the kneeling and bowing of people that are cast in this fire? All right, so the other thing that stood out is we also find the two hays in Yahweh's name, Yod Hei Vav Hei. So that make the two hays very powerful, and the meaning of the letter Hey means light and truth, symbolizing the commandments of Yahweh. And we can see that the light is shining upon the blessing. So you can only bless Yahweh if you access it through the letter Hey. So you need the revelation of Yahweh in order to truly worship him. Only those who are true worshippers will worship him in knowledge and in truth. What truth? The truth about who he really is. People have a wrong perception of who he is. They think he's an angry God, he's there to smite people, and if he's like that, I don't want to worship him. And a lot of people that's been affected by the Catholic doctrines don't want anything to do with Yahweh, and they'd rather be atheists and just be good people. So that's the skewing of that. The other thing we see, that's a blessing. When we look at it, what blessing will you receive? Because we read in the Torah portion, and this is the blessing that Elohim blessed the children of Israel. So we will receive a blessing. And this blessing is what we read in Genesis 15, where Yahweh told Abraham, I am your exceedingly great reward. You get him. He is your blessing. A relationship with him, face to face, that is your blessing. Not streets of gold and a mansion. That's a side note. That's not really important. It's the person that is the real blessing that we will receive, not things. Okay, the blessing and the fiery law. What we read in Deuteronomy 33, verse 1 to 3, and Moses, a man of Elohim, blessed the Israelites with a blessing before he died. He said, Yahweh came from Sinai for his people. He rose from Seir like the sun, he appeared like the sunshine from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000 of saints. From his right hand went the fiery law for them. So what I want to emphasize here is the concept of fiery law. We need to understand that in order to understand the concept of fire, the concept of Yahweh's character, and that's the same character that's within his law. And the short translation of fiery law, which is Ish Da'at, is basically referring to his Torah, or the two letters Hey that we saw in his name. Now, what we see here is that fiery law, Ish Da'at, Ish means fire, and it's also translated as foundation. It's actually Ash. Ta'at means law, and that law has been cut with Abraham. That's the origin of the law. It's the covenant that was cut, and Abraham cut the animals in half, and then a smoking furnace and a torch passed through the animals to confirm that covenant. So we see the fire and the flame and the furnace in relation to the covenant as well as Yahweh's law. And that connects the Torah to the covenant, and those who access the covenant will stand before Yahweh and experience his fire, which is the foundation of who he is. And it is dangerous to approach Yahweh. That's why we had the tabernacle pattern, to show us the process of preparing in order to one day stand before Yahweh. And it's all about cycles of preparation of holiness, the elevation of holiness in order to stand before a holy God. So holiness is not something that we do that we say is salvation. Holiness will protect your salvation. You are saved, but if you are saved and foolish, your holiness will not keep your salvation intact. And his consuming fire will destroy anything that is not of him. There might be a little bit left, and you might be called least in the kingdom. So beware of not embracing Yahweh's fullness and taking him serious, because your elevation of holiness is dependent on that. Now, what we see is the progression of light, the progression of light and darkness through the words that's been used here. He said, he rose from Seir like the sun. So it's like the sun coming up from the east. Then he said, he appeared like sunshine from Mount Paran. So that's like 12 o'clock in the afternoon, daylight, the sun is out. And then he said, he come with 10,000 of saints. From his right hand went a fiery law from them. So this is the time when the sun is setting, where there's darkness. Then the brightness of his coming and his fiery law will light up the sky from the east to the west. And that is the sign of the Son of Man appearing. In the darkest time, when you don't expect the light, his fiery law will come. Now I want to connect this with Beresheeth, as I mentioned. When we read in Beresheeth, it says, before he created, his spirit moved over the waters of the deep. And when you look at his spirit, the light of the spirit that symbolizing fire is the letter Shin. And that letter Shin is the flame that moved over the waters of the deep, that cast light into the darkness. It's the same language and symbolism as the Mashiach appearing with the brightness of his coming and the fiery law in his right hand. The same language you see in creation as well. So the final judgment and the creation process is linked through the language and the symbolism of what we see in this verse. I'll leave you with that. I've got a bit more explanation a bit later on. Any comments or questions on that? Anyone confused? So I told you I'm going to connect Beresheeth with this last one.
Can I go back to the 7 festivals and the 5 months of darkness?
Yes.
And just ask a question. Okay, so there is a festival left out of that, as far as I'm concerned, and that is Shabbat. So I in those 5 months of darkness, would it be right that on the Shabbat there is a day of light?
The Shabbat, in relation to the festivals, is the little gear that turn the big gear of the Moedim. The Shabbat is always part of the festivals anyway.
Yes,
So
but
it's not that the Shabbat is left out. It's always present, even within the time of darkness. The small light of Shabbat is always there, and it's sticking things over, because you won't get to a Passover unless the Shabbat turned the gears from a Sukkot to a Passover. So those Moedim cycles depends on the Shabbat. And Shabbat is basically the basic preparation specifically during the time of darkness, so that we can arrive at the next main milestone, which is Passover. Sorry. Does that answer your question? I want to ask, give it a different point of view.
Yeah. But Shabbat, like the 8th day, is a standalone Moedim, according to Leviticus 23. So I understand what you're saying as it's a gear that turns the rest of them to go from one to another, but it's also a day of light, which you've touched on in itself.
But it's also the largest of them all. If you look at the 7-day creation, you look at the 7,000 years. The 7th millennium is the Shabbat, which is the climax of creation. The most important day of creation is that day, because that's where the kingdom of Yahweh overlaps with the kingdom of the physical, and it only happens on the Sabbath, on the Shabbat. So that rings true from that perspective as well. So if the larger is so important, then the small one, which is the smallest of all the festivals, which is the 7th day rest, is just as important as the climax of creation, which is the 7th millennium. Where Yahweh will appear with his glory. So it's like a hologram. You get the small thing in the largest, and the large you get the smallest in the large as well. So they confirm each other.
Yes. Thank you for that.
So the Sabbath, in the context of that, is the most important festival, if you look at that. Because it drives everything, and it's the pinnacle of creation, and it sits on top of the 7th millennium, which is the goal of the Moedim. So it's the goal of the creation week, but it's also the goal of the 6 preceding festivals.
That's why it's important for us to keep the Sabbath. We can't just neglect it.
And what we learned this year specifically is that the Sabbath is where we sink in with the cycle of the Torah. So it is as if the Sabbath, the essence of the Sabbath now became the Torah itself, and interacting with the Torah within the topics and the time frame and the timings of those topics throughout the year, and also throughout the Moedim. So that just say that everything regarding time and the cycles is found upon the foundation of the Torah. Because if you turn the wheels and you don't have the foundation, what do you discuss on those days? They are empty. And empty words is idle words. Yahweh don't like idle words. He wants to fill our mouths with the essence of his Torah, in sync with every week's topic and in sync with every Moedim's topic. And that's where the richness of those days come in, and the meaningfulness of those days come in, if you fill it with the contents of his Torah. All right, back to fiery law. Already explained now the intensity. Low intensity, the sun rises. And we see Mount Seir, or the concept of Seir, it's actually Mount Seir. Then we get Mount Paran. And it also mentioned there Mount Sinai. So we have 3 mountains. We're going to look at the 3 mountains. And the 3 mountains is going to reveal so much to us. In this first layer, we look at the revelation of light, the intensity of light. And we expect darkness, but then the highest intensity of light will come. The true essence of light. And that's why it says there will be no more sun, because Yahweh will be the light shining from Jerusalem. It's the same concept of total darkness. The fiery law in the right hand of Yahweh, or the Mashiach, is the brightest light you can get, and you can't compare the sun to that light, because he's above that. When Yahweh said, "Let there be light," that's the fiery law. In the midst of darkness, that's his spirit moving over the darkness. And then he created the lesser light, the sun, and even the lesser light, the moon, and then the stars. So they are not in comparison. The fiery law and the light of Yahweh, who is Yahweh, who is the consuming fire, sits above the creation and all the things he created. It's always been there. It's part of him. Okay, smoking furnace connected to the covenant. So the other thing I want to give it as a different angle is, how do I access Yahweh? I need to access his covenant, but his covenant is based on a fiery law. So I will be scorched and going through fire in my attempt to access Yahweh. And he said, you will bow down to me. So he basically will sort of force you in a way, very gently. Just like time, you have to step over the threshold of death. You can't avoid it. You have to go through it. It's like a pregnant woman. She has to give birth. There's no avoidance. In the same way, you will encounter the covenant, regardless of whether you want to or not. And you will go through that fire, engaging with his covenant in some way, shape, or form. And that will enforce the fire upon you, which is the brimstone and the torture, which is the refinement process in his presence that will happen as a result of the fire of his covenant that you will engage with. And that same fire was the shin, the fire of the spirit, the light that moved over the darkness of the water, of the deep, before creation started. So it's all about the covenant, it's all about Yahweh, it's all about his Torah. And the Torah and the covenant is spiritual and existed before creation with Yahweh, because it is of him. It is him in another medium. It's in a book form. We read it, and through his spirit it gives life, and that's the Mashiach who dwelled among us. He is the living Torah. All right, fiery law is the gematria of 705. That means chain. This is interesting. Staggering, crook-backed, hump-backed, mistress of the well. Now, who can that be? It sounds like
Santa's wife.
the well.
A well.
Yeah, not a well.
well.
Not a well. The mistress of the well is a female figure, which is normally a religion symbolism, that provides water, that gives you water, that give water. And that is another way of saying religion. There are many mistresses of the well who take Yahweh's word and taint it with their enchantments and the things they put in it, and then they offer that water to the thirsty. And then the people will get sick, or they will be bound, and that's where the fire need to come in order to separate the bondage and to heal them, like we see with the brimstone and the meaning of that. So the mistress of the well causes people to be enchained, people to stagger. So there's some sort of an alcohol content in there as well. Sounds like the Whore of Babylon that makes people drunk from a cup. And then you get a crooked back or a humpback. That means you are not upright. And upright is another term for righteous. So these people aren't righteous because they haven't received the message of truth that will make their back straight, that they will know where they stand, and they are staggering like drunkards, drinking from this cup that's been given to them by the mistress of the well, and they are enchained, sitting at her feet, becoming more drunk. We're going to look at drunk Ephraim in a moment. So this is the foundation of this. And this is connected to fiery law. So what this means is that the fiery law is the solution from releasing the change, from healing the crooked backs, making their back straight, and to give them the true water from his well. So when you engage with his fiery law, you will behold, so you will see. You will be strong and firm. Your back will be straight. You will stand on a base and a foundation and a pedestal that is solid. And then you will have the drink of the true water that comes from the innermost parts of Mashiach, which is his spirit. And then you will see him in his seat of authority in the city, ruling with his fiery law from his throne. That's the established kingdom. And that's the purpose of the fiery law. That's the purpose and the end goal of the Torah, is so that we can get Yahweh as our reward. What does he look like? He is the one with the fiery law in his right hand, like the king seated in the city, and he's giving us the water to drink from. That's also the fountain that flow, and from the tree of life, the waters that will give you drink. Like Yeshua said, you will never thirst again, and you will stand strong on the foundation, and you will behold his glory. So that all is wrapped up in the gematria of the fiery law. Any comments or questions on that? There's a lot in fiery law, isn't there? But it's a very strong concept. It's sort of like a flaming sword. It gives you that same aspect. And the flaming sword comes from the mouth of Yeshua. He's the one who spoke it. It's written down, and it's in his hand of the king to rule by, but it's also the sword by which he overcome the enemy. So it's one and the same thing, but it all originate out of the mouth of Mashiach, the one who's seated on the throne in the city with the Father. Another angle on fiery law is Ishta'at. I've highlighted with color the Aleph Taf on the outer ends of the word, left and right. We know the Aleph Taf is the beginning and the end, and that's where we find ourselves in this Torah portion. We're at the end of the Torah cycle. We're going to start with this Torah cycle. If we just leave this one hanging, we don't have an Aleph anymore. We need to connect the Aleph to the Taf, and this Torah portion is the Taf. And this Torah portion has to do with death and separation. That the Taf is also the symbol of the stake which Yeshua died on. So it's important to connect it back to the Aleph, which is the ox, the strength, the resurrection, the new cycle starting. So we connect the two through the Aleph Taf. And in the middle, we get the word Sod, Shin Dalet. Just looking at the two letters, Shin is the spirit of Yahweh, and his fire, and Dalet is the door. So we see that the Mashiach, Yeshua, as well as his spirit, is in the middle of the Aleph Taf, found within Ish Da'at, which is interesting. Now, the word fiery law, and Aleph Taf, has the potential to burn, to cleanse, to judge, and to destroy. That is the concept of the fiery law. And what we saw with the judge and the goldsmith, the idea of the goldsmith, is that the judge is more like Solomon, to give direction, to give wisdom, rather to say that you go this way, you go that way. Yes, there is a time of separation where that will happen, but the judges that will rule the people for 1,000 years, they won't say, you're going to hell, you're going to hell, you're going to hell. And then when they meet someone, oh, you're going to hell, I just want to judge you now, you're going to hell. But it's not about that. It's about teaching them, so there will be a separation where the holy ones will be in the city and the unholy ones will be on the outside, and they will attack those in the city, which will be Gog and Magog. Now, the fiery law and the separation and the concept of the cleansing of fire is quoted by Paul. I think last week I said it was in Luke, but it's actually not. It's 1 Corinthians 3, verse 10 to 13. According to the grace of Yahweh, which is given unto me as a wise master builder, I have laid the foundation, and another builds thereon. But let every man take heed how he builds thereupon. For other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Yeshua the Messiah. Now, if any man build upon this foundation, silver, gold, and precious stones, wood, hay, and stubble, every man's work shall be made manifest, for the day shall declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire, and the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. If every man's work abide, which he has built thereupon, he shall receive a reward. If any man's work shall be burnt, he shall suffer loss, but he himself shall be saved, yet as by fire. So we see the concept of the fire, which we connect to judgment and to burning and all that. But what we also see here is that there is the concept of destroying things that are not precious, which is the wood, hay, and stubble, and keeping the things that are precious, which is gold, silver, and precious stones. Now, which one do you think you are? Of all of them, which one are you? Are you stubble, hay, wood, precious stones, silver, or gold?
Precious stone.
No, you're not the precious stone.
Gold?
You are definitely gold.
Okay.
Why do I say so? Because there's a goldsmith.
Oh, yeah.
And he's going to refine you, which is the process of brimstone and torture. And he will test the purity of the gold, and he's repurposing something of value to make it even more valuable. And that is you. You are the gold. You are the most precious thing. Now, if you think about it, if we are precious souls, which can be compared to the physical element of gold, will fire ever destroy gold? No. It will only keep it in a molten state of heat and discomfort until it finds a mold in which it will be reshaped and cool down, and then have a purpose for the one who cast you in that mold. Now, I'm using the word cast you into something, because when you're going to look at people that's going to be cast into something,
The lake of fire.
the lake of fire, and the same language is now being used, and we see that the gold can only be cast in a mold in the presence of fire. That's where the concept of lake of fire comes from. And we're going to look at the word lake specifically, and you'll be amazed what the word lake actually means. Anyway,
Don't give it away now.
I don't want to give it away now.
A big watery thing?
Hey?
A big watery thing? A lake?
Watery thing. Like,
Yeah, there is a watery thing, but there's definitely fire as well. So we're going to see what the symbolism of that mean in relation to specifically connecting Revelation with Beresheeth, as well as this Torah portion and Beresheeth, and our prophetic storyline of the 7th millennium and the 8th millennium, and also overlaying that with the idea of the 8th day is the day of creation. And then we will make sense of all of it if you're able to overlay all of those things on top of one another. Now, 1 Corinthians 3 is not something that Paul downloaded because he was a spirit-filled man of God and this is a new revelation. It's a quote that comes from Isaiah 28. And I've just selected a few juicy bits from there that's applicable to what Paul is saying, and also there to give us some context. Now it starts with verse 1, talking about the arrogant drunks of Ephraim. Isn't that an interesting concept? How horrible it will be for the arrogant drunks of Ephraim. Their glorious beauty is like withered flower. They are like at the entrance of a fertile valley. There they lie drunk from wine, because they drank from, what's that lady's name?
Women from the well.
No, let me just find that woman. I want to not misquote it. What we find? Oh, come on, I need to get my mouse. Sorry. Mistress of the well. So the mistress of the well made Ephraim drunk. They are at the entrance of a fertile valley, but they are lying drunk from her wine. Isn't that interesting? And that is the same language used in Revelation, that the people are made drunk and they drink from the cup from the Whore of Babylon, which is symbolism of religion that's infiltrated by the cancer called Babylon, which is mixing and confusion. Babylon is not something in itself. It's a hybrid that's created through splicing. If you mix human DNA with the animal DNA, you get something that Yahweh can't fill with the spirit, and then some other entity can come into it and manifest in this world. In the same way, Babylon is something that Yahweh created, and then there's a hybrid, something that is impure, that has been mixed in, and now it can manifest in the physical. And brimstone is designed to expel those things and to break those things and to bring healing. So you can see the connection here. So brimstone is the only thing that can heal religion, if you connect the dots. All right, then he says, Adonai has one who is strong and powerful. He is like a hailstorm, a destructive wind. He is like a thunderstorm, an overwhelming flood. He will throw them to the ground forcefully. The arrogant drunks of Ephraim will be trampled underfoot. Do you see the language? Who will be trampled underfoot? The grapes in the winepress. You see the same language? Who will be in the winepress? Drunk Ephraim will definitely be there. My old drunk, my cousin, my drunk Ephraim cousin, brother. Anyway, will be trampled underfoot. When that day comes, Yahweh Tzevaot, which means the God of armies, him and his armies, will be announcing in full greatness and glory and power. He will be like a glorious crown for his few remaining people. He will give a spirit of justice to those who judge. What do you think are they? They are the judges we were talking about who will judge the people during the 7th millennium. Judges like in Solomon, who will guide them, teach them, and lead them. Teach them the Torah, the fiery law. He will give them glorious crown. A crown is authority and anointing. He will give strength to those who defend the city gates in battle. What scene do you think is that? What city? What gates? No, it's the third temple and the city surrounding it. And that is Gog and Magog. That's the war he's referring to here. Whosoever believes in him will not worry. I will make justice a measuring line and a righteous plumb line. Hail will sweep away your refuge of lies, and flood waters will wash away your hiding place. Your treaty with death will be wiped away. Your agreement with death will not stand. So this is one of the things that I've made an assumption, when it's only my interpretation. I believe the people that will go into the 7th millennium because of the great eclipse will not see death. They will live for 1,000 years. Did anyone live for 1,000 years before the first judgment, which was the flood? Yes, people live up to 1,000 years. Will people live up to 1,000 years again to look at the menorah pattern possibility? I think so. And if these people have a treaty and a covenant, an agreement with death, which say you will only live 120 years, that will no longer stand. And they will continue living throughout 1,000 years, going through the cleansing process. And they will probably multiply. That's where the multitude of people that will stand before Yahweh will come in, that you can't count. It's also the multitude of people, it's like the sand of the sea, that will come and do battle against the holy ones in the city. So there's going to be a lot of people at the end of the 1,000 years. It will pass by, your treaty with death will be wiped away. Your agreement with death will not stand. When the overwhelming disasters pass by, you will be trampled by it. Each time it passes by, it will take you. Now there you got yourself a cycle, isn't it? The trampling and the disaster will come, overtake you and pass you by. It will trample you. Then it will come again. Each time it will trample you, and disaster, overwhelming disaster will hit you. So there will be cycles upon cycles of cleansing during the 7th millennium that will be upon the people during that time. And that's their grace and the refinement. That's why there will be holy people in the city. And they will be becoming sober again. Old drunk Ephraim will be trampled underfoot and he will wake up. And we're going to look at who will join old drunk Ephraim during the 7th millennium, and the key is within the 3 mountains that we can look at in a moment. Any questions or comments on that one? It's interesting, isn't it? And all we do is we connect the Hebrew study tools, the idea of cycles, connecting language. And the reason I connect language is when Paul quoted something, he quoted a key phrase that linked to a passage. Now, if there's a key phrase in this in a prophecy that I can link to Revelation, I might do so because that's the way Hebrew works. There's no scripture and verse in Hebrew. All right, the 3 mountains, purging the devil, religion, and the self. It's all about the purification that we read about. So we got Sinai, Mount Seir, and Mount Paran, and the fiery law, all in the mix in the context of this cleansing period. Now, as I said, the book of the Torah, the last book of the Torah, which is this Torah portion, which connect the 3 mountains, to the book of Beresheeth, is in the theme of creation. So we can say that the previous cycles of being trampled underfoot and the cycles of the disaster that will come upon you over and over and over again is a creation process or a restoration process. It's not there to torture you because Yahweh finds pleasure in people screaming out of pain. That's not what he's like. He's not I don't know what you call them. That is not his character. His character is to take something you can't destroy with fire, which is gold, that's very precious, which is your soul and all the souls of those people, and he's refining it over and over again to get all the impurities out of it so he can repurpose the gold. That's what it's about. Now, Mount Seir is connected to the word Sair, that means hairy, goat, kid, rough, and devil. Now, when you read hairy, it's not Harry, it's hairy. That's Esau, the man of the field, isn't it? He was hairy. And we also have the concept of goat and the devil. So Mount Seir has to do with those who have been deceived by the devil. So they, one extreme, a Satanist and just a good person, just doing whatever they feel they should do in their heart. That's a very toned down Satanist or devil worshipper, worshipping the self, indirectly worshipping the devil. They are the ones being deceived, and they are grouped under Mount Seir. The Seir comes from the root word sa'ar, that means terrified, be afraid, whirlwind, whole as a storm. And we saw that same language previously with drunk Ephraim and that verse of the cleansing that Paul quoted from. We also see the context that we looked on previously is in Daniel 11, which was the 2 kingdoms that came into battle, and also the vile one that was present in the midst of that. And we got that same characters within our physical time frame as well. Paran means place of caverns. Now, a cavern is a cave. Now, if you think about it, when you are in lockdown, and you want to see your screen better, what do? You close your curtains. And it's as if you are in a dark cave. And people are basically cave dwellers. And a lot of the young people prefer to be cave dwellers. They don't really go out. They don't want to because they find their interaction with the world through cyberspace, which I think is very linked to the beast, which has a system.
Well, we watched that.
We watched
the documentary last night on
human
on stand.
Yeah, it's all about artificial intelligence, and it's scary what's been happening within technology and how they use it. And the cave dwellers, the modern people today, who are on their devices every waking moment, they are being controlled by the AI, and they are in bondage. And that's the other bondage that they need to be released from. So that's easy. You just take out with a magnetic EMP, magnetic wave, and all devices will be wiped out. Anyway, the paran comes from the word pa'ar, that means beauty, to glorify, to beautify, be adorned, be honored. So that shows us the end goal. After people are being released from this bondage, they will be beautified. They will not be destroyed. Yahweh is not angry to the point where he will just destroy them. He wants to beautify them. He wants to glorify them, and he wants to adorn them with beauty, and refine them through these processes of purification. And that's the purpose of the Great Tribulation, and that's the purpose of the winepress. It's to beautify and to cleanse people and to heal people. All right. We've got 3 mountains and 4 groups. So the first mountain is Mount Sinai, the second mountain is Mount Seir, third mountain is Mount Paran. Mount Sinai associates and connects to 2 groups who already met drunk Ephraim. And Ephraim means double fruitfulness. Fruitfulness is associated with the letter Nun. Nun has the symbolism of fish. Fish is a symbol of Christianity. So Ephraim links to Christians who have drunk from the mistress of the well, and they became drunk with their religion. And there are over 40,000 different cocktails being given to Ephraim, and they form over 40,000 different religious denominations that are not doing Torah.
You can also relate it to the age of passes.
Yeah, that's the timing.
Yeah, I know, I'm just saying, because in this timing, this is where all of this happened.
Yeah.
All of these different religions and...
So that's the other hint.
Yeah.
Is the timing, is the 2 fish, it's spices, it's the age of the Gentiles coming to an end, going into the age of Aquarius, which are the bowls that's going to be poured out, which correlate with the Great Tribulation and the winepress, which is the next age or 2,000 years we're going to move into. All right, so that's one hint. So we've got drunk Ephraim that's connected to Mount Sinai. They rejected the Torah that was given at Sinai. Who are the people who accepted the Torah at Mount Sinai? Our Jewish brothers. But they rejected Yeshua as the Messiah, so by default they will be there as well. So you get drunk Ephraim and Jews, 2 groups in the winepress. Then we have Mount Seir. Now Mount Seir is connected to the field, the nations, and the goat, and that's also connected to Esau. Now Esau is also relating to the birthright, and Mount Paran is connected to Ishmael, and Ishmael are those who hate Yahweh's people. So we get 2 people who know Yahweh. One rejected Torah, the other rejected Messiah. Then you have those who are just in the world, the people of the field who followed the goat, who's the devil. Good people, bad intentions, and didn't know what to do, so they ended up following the wrong one. And then you get those who are explicitly against Yahweh's people, and there are probably more religions that can group under Islam, but Islam is the main one who hates and want to annihilate Yahweh's people. So those are the 4 groups who will be present during the winepress. And within that, you can see that all the elements of the war of Gog and Magog is there. All the elements are there to have the knowledge to be able to build the 3rd temple. You've got all the elements there for people who have the knowledge of Messiah, who will gradually accept the Messiah and teach other people, and the knowledge of that will roll over to the people who come to faith. So everything is in amongst those four groups represented by these three mountains. Anyone, any comment? All right, the other aspect of the fiery law, we get another verse that referred to Yahweh's word as a consuming fire and a hammer of a judge. And that's in Jeremiah 23, where it says, isn't my word like fire or like a hammer that shatters rock? Now this rock is basically the hardness of the hearts of the people who are now sent into, who are harvested to go into the winepress. And then he said, I'm against the prophets who steal my words from each other, declares Yahweh. I'm against the prophets who speak their own thoughts and who say that they speak for me. I'm against those who prophesy dreams they make up, declares Yahweh. They tell the dreams they make up and led my people astray with their lies and their wild talk. So this is where the hammer will come down and shatter those false prophets and those hardened hearts that are currently or will be entrapped within the 1,000-year winepress. All right, the end of the 1,000-year winepress. This is basically based on Ash's question last week. So I got a verse from Revelation 7:9, a couple of verses from Revelation 20, and then from Revelation 22. And you have to read all these in relation to one another because they are in context of one another. So Asher, do you want to just elaborate a bit more on what you're struggling with these verses?
Sorry,
Anyway,
Phil.
Oh, there you are.
What was the question?
We had a discussion last week, and the second judgment or the last judgment has to do with the lake of fire. And then in Revelation 22, it talks about people who are on the outside, people who are on the inside. So how do you connect those things?
Yes. Yeah, that was my question. So basically, if there is a final judgment, and that was my thinking, how would there be people still outside the New Jerusalem living in sin in a perfected world? Yeah, so that was my question.
That is a very good question. So I'm going to try and answer the question I've gave you a few hints already, by looking at next week's Torah portion, which is Beresheeth, which is the theme of creation, in context of what we see here in Revelation, also in context of the 7th millennium, stepping into the 8th millennium, which will be the cycle of creation. So Revelation 7 basically talks about those standing in front of the throne of the Lamb. Those are the people who are coming out of the terrible suffering. And they've got white robes, and they basically are crying with a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. Now, that language referred to the language we read, after the city come down, Yahweh will be there and the Lamb. So that placed this verse in context of after the New Jerusalem comes down, these people will stand before the throne and before the Lamb. So the Father will be there, Yahweh, and the Lamb will be there. And he says, I saw a large crowd from every nation, tribe, people, and language. No one was able to count how many people there were. So I made the comment last week. I said, I think 80-90% of the people will take the mark of the beast. If you just look at what they do now, they are confronted with something of the same kind, and they are just handing themselves over for the benefit of whatever they will get, whether it's freedom, food, jobs, whatever. In saying that, it contradicts Revelation 7 that says you won't be able to count them. No, out of 7 billion people, or 8 billion or 9 billion, I don't know how many people, if 80% of them will take the mark of the beast, then this verse doesn't make sense to me. That's just my logic in reality where we live now, and if we are in that time frame. That's why I sort of struggle with that one. Then you read in Revelation 20, it talks about the context of the 1,000 years, where an angel will chain the serpent for 1,000 years, and he will not be able to deceive the nations anymore for 1,000 years until the 1,000 years is over. So that implies that there will be nations on the earth alive after the Great Tribulation, and they won't be deceived by the serpent anymore. I know my Seventh-day Adventist brothers, they've got a very, very good explanation on this, which I'm not going to elaborate on, which I don't agree with. So moving on. And it says that they had not worshipped the beast, their statue, or branded on their foreheads or hands, which is relating to the mark of the beast. And they lived and ruled with Messiah for 1,000 years. Blessed and holy are those who are included in the first time that people come back to life. That's a resurrection. The second death has no power over them, and they will continue to be priests of Yahweh and Messiah, and they will rule with him for 1,000 years. So this is where the concept of the judges come in. They're also called the kingdom of priests, which is the theme that we followed through our Torah. That's the intent that Yahweh had for Israel, kingdom of priests. They failed that, and then through Mashiach, he gave that authority to people in the nations to be part of the kingdom of priests, and through his spirit being anointed in order to rule like a judge, like Solomon, with wisdom, and then to teach the people for 1,000 years. So they are going to rule the nations for 1,000 years, who are not going to be deceived by the serpent anymore. So that's the purpose of that. And that makes perfect sense. If Satan is bound, they've got one less thing to worry about, but the ego is the Satan that will recreate that same entity, but from within. But Yahweh's fiery Torah will be in the hand of his people, his judges, his kingdom of priests, and they will teach the people, and then the separation will take place. The holy people will move where the Jerusalem is, and they will build the third temple and restore the city. And then those on the outside who refuse that, they will come and battle against those inside. And then Gog and Magog will happen as a result of that, which is verse 7. When the 1,000 years is over, Satan will be freed from his prison, and he will go out, deceive Gog and Magog, the nations in the four corners of the earth, and gather them for war. And they will be numerous as the grains of sand on the seashore. Note the language, promise given to Abraham. Now, this seems like Yahweh gave a covenant to Abraham, and Satan stole that promise. I'm going to take the sand of the sea. You can have the stars. I want the sand of the sea. So that's a separation that's happening here. So what's going to happen with the sand of the sea? Because they are now under Satan's control, and they are a multitude. You can't count them. And that links back to Revelation 7. So there's a breach there. Will these people who are under Satan's control will attack the people inside the city? Will they eventually bow their knee and stand before the throne? In context of the restored city, not saying it's going to happen in the 8th millennium. It might be later. Just a question. Keep that question in the back of your head. Then he said, verse 11, I saw a large white throne and one sitting on it, and the earth and the sky fled from its presence, but no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, both important and unimportant people, standing in front of the throne. Books were opened, including the book of life, and the dead were judged on the basis of what they had done and recorded in the books. And the sea gave up their dead, death and hell gave up their dead. People were judged based on what they've done. death and hell were thrown into the fiery lake. Those names who were not found in the book of life were thrown into the fiery lake. Now, I want to just emphasize something here. It says, the sea gave up its dead. So, will there be a fish that will be saved in the kingdom? Or is it only humans? This is a stupid question, but I need to ask it. If the sea give up its dead, who lives in the sea? It's not humans.
Yeah, but doesn't sea mean nations?
I'm just asking the stupid question to link it to something. We're going to look at the idea of the sea or the ocean, the concept of that, and that there are people, souls, bound within the idea of the sea, and they will give up their dead.
I don't understand what you're saying.
You'll understand it in a moment. I'm just linking it to the sea.
Well, God did give the Ruach to his animals too.
Yeah, but these people will be judged by the book of life. I don't think animals their names will be in the book of life. It's only for people who are in the likeness of Yahweh, not in the likeness of any animal or fish or bird. So it's all, the book of Revelation is full of symbolism. Like Letty said, the sea and the ocean links to the nations. So immediately you'll see there's a symbolic aspect to it. It's not literally that people will come from the sea. There's symbolism behind it that tell us something. And we need to find out what is the link to the ocean or the sea and souls and the book of life. And
Philip?
the cleansing cycle we're looking at. Yes?
Oh, sorry to interrupt because I've been trying to get the speaker on. I was just thinking of the maritime law.
Yeah, what's that?
The maritime law that we're supposed to be under, which is the law of the sea. That is in operation at the moment around the world for our governments. But we can talk after if you like.
Okay. No, let's talk about it after. Let me just finish this. Otherwise, we're going to lose our little train of thought. Because this is a very important concept I want to share. But you need to understand the symbolism. And you just need to unhook a few things in order to put these little building blocks together to make sense of it. Then Revelation 22 says, I'm coming soon. I will bring my reward with me to pay all the people based on what they've done. I'm the Aleph and the Tav, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. Blessed are those who wash their robes so that they may have right to the tree of life and may go through the gates into the city. Outside are the dogs, the sorcerers, sexual sinners, murderers, idolaters, and all who lie in what they say and what they do. So that connects yet again to Revelation 7 verse 9. We get the idea of the city where the throne and the lamb is, and in here it says you enter through the gates of the city, so you enter in. So that implies that there's people inside the city, people outside the city. Now when we go back to previous Torah portions, I think it was Torah portion Bahar, when we looked at that, we look at the foot of the mountain, and there will be tents. And the tents will be like a Sukkot. And inside the city are the crystal layers where people will have access to, and different people will have different access levels based on being least or being greater in the kingdom. And then you get those on the outskirts, outside, and the city is within the spiritual realm, but the outside or the foot of the mountain, because this city is basically as a representation of Mount Sinai as well, where the presence of Yahweh is. It's just symbolic now of the city. Now at the foot of the mountain were the people. Now at the foot of the mountain there will be nations. On the outside of the city there will be nations. And they will have access, and that's where Zechariah 14 comes in. They need to come year after year to the foot of the mountain where the tents will be, which were called tabernacles or palaces of the prince. or the king. That's where Yahweh will meet them. It's like having a tabernacle within the physical that is close to the spiritual. It's like being on the shore where the sea is. Now, if you can think about that, it's said in the New Jerusalem, or in the new heavens, new earth, there is no sea anymore. Because the physical sea is now being replaced by a sea of nations. I'm going to get to that point in a moment. They are the people on the outskirts of the city in the physical. The people inside the city is in the physical realm. They are above time. The people on the outside, they are entrapped under time. They still have a covenant they need to obey to. You need to die after 120 years, which is the one that we are currently under. And that's where you will get the resurrection that will resurrect you out of the physical into the spiritual. So death and resurrection has to do with elevation. So those who are still trapped in death are basically still trapped in a lower realm. And the lowest of the lower realm is called Sheol, which is still part of the physical realm. It's just the lowest point where disembodied bodies are kept. So the idea of elevation, to be resurrected or to be transformed or translated or renewed body, whatever you want to call it, is to receive a renewed body that exists in the spiritual realm. And you, just like Philip, can move from this place to another place, translate. And the people during the 7th millennium will have similar abilities, being spiritual entities, having the ability like Mashiach, when after his death and after his resurrection, he could present himself to people and then instantly present himself to someone else, moving through space and time without being affected, because he does it from a spiritual perspective. So the judges that will be in the 7th millennium, as well as those who made it within the 8th millennium, who has been elevated, they are no longer bound by time or space, because they exist in the spiritual and they entered the city. Those on the outside, they are still trapped in the physical. They are the lepers outside the city, same symbolism. Now I'm going to jump on to the next slide, which will explain a bit more. What is the fiery lake, or the lake of fire? Same two verses there. They will be cast in the lake of fire. Now, the term fiery lake and the term fiery law automatically, through the language, connected in my mind. They're one of the same kind. The one is from the spiritual, the other one is from the physical. The one is the release into the presence, the other one is entrapped into the lowest part of the physical, which is the presence of the darkness, if you like. It's the kingdom of the north, where the fiery law comes from, where the fire is Yahweh himself. And the kingdom of the south is the kingdom of darkness, of where the darkness is the lowest part, who is the Nachash himself. And people are entrapped in the physical. We are currently entrapped in the physical under the power of Nachash. He's not bound. We are living in his kingdom currently. Yeshua will come and destroy his kingdom and then release us so we can be elevated into Yahweh's kingdom, the kingdom of the north. We are currently serving under the bondage and the chains and everything he put upon us of the kingdom of the south. Now that kingdom still exists, because what will Yahweh do with the false prophet, with the serpent and the beast? He will cast them back into their kingdom, which is called the lake of fire. Now I'm going to explain the lake in a moment. We have to go to the Greek, which is the word lake. In the middle there, lake is the word limnei. And there's the Greek there. That means lake, to be poured out, or nearness to a shore. It comes from the word liman, that means haven, safe haven, or harbor, that is found close to the sea. So you see my symbolism here? The sea, according to Jewish culture, is a bad place. People don't want to have a seafront house. They think the sea is evil. It's full of darkness. Where do they get that idea? They read Beresheeth. They read Genesis chapter 1. There's darkness, and the darkness has the backstory of judgment and destruction, because there's a flood that destroyed the earth, that covered the whole earth. And then Yahweh's light came, and his spirit moved over that after judgment. So you see the context here. And we discussed this previously, that the Beresheeth story is the beginning of our cycle. There was a cycle before our cycle, where there was judgment and destruction prior to us, because Yahweh used the destroyed earth as the foundational building block of this cycle that we're currently in. And we're going to look at the word again, which is the word choshek, that is the dark waters of the deep, that can be associated with this dark ocean of the kingdom of the south, the kingdom of darkness, that entrap the letters chet, shin, and kaf. Now, the letter chet was the one that stood out for me last time when we did Beresheeth. That means life. So there's a life form entrapped in darkness, and the shin that you see there is the spirit of Yahweh moving over. So now we've got the fire, we've got the concept of a lake, we've got souls entrapped in darkness, and Yahweh's spirit is moving over it, and it's called creation. Now he wants to release those who are bound in darkness into the light, move them from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. And we were once trapped within the kingdom of darkness, and we were taken from the darkness of the sea. So the sea had to give us up. This choshek, the waters of the darkness, had to give us up. And it was only done through the power of the Spirit of Yahweh. Only He can transform you. Yeah, and that's to do with the fiery law, the fire, the shin, the spirit, the fire, the Yahweh. Yahweh himself is the only one who can save you. But at the end of our cycle, guess what will happen? People will be transformed. They will come and enter the city. Then he will take those who hasn't made it, whose names aren't in the book of life. He will take them and cast them into the shore, which is the pool of darkness of the waters of the deep, that will be the building block for the next cycle of creation, which will be their Beresheeth. And those who have been elevated, hopefully it's us, will be inside, but those on the outside basically just means those within the sea. So just like you find the ocean and the sea now, when you drive to Kingscliff or wherever you are, it's similar symbolically and spiritually, that there's an ocean full of nations or souls of nations entrapped in the darkness of a lower medium than the medium of air, the medium of light, the medium of ruach. It's the medium of water.
At the end, the people who still don't bow the knee will be cast into a lake of fire. But that lake, are you going to talk about that now?
Yeah, so the lake is the harbor, the safe haven at the seashore. So that lake connects to the kingdom of darkness, where the darkest part of darkness is Sheol. The intermediate phase of that is the shore. We're currently on the shore. We're on the beach. We're not dead. We're not in the pool of darkness, in the deepest part of darkness, which is Sheol. We're living, but we are living dead. We fell, just like Yahweh told Adam and Chava, today you will die. They died that day, and we are still in that mode of death, which is not the higher life. And when you die, when you're in the lower end of death, you go to the lowest form of death, which is Sheol. And you need to be resurrected from that and from this level to go to the kingdom of light, where the shin is, where the fire is, where Yahweh is. And that's the purpose of his Mashiach, his Torah, his fire, and his cleansing cycles, is to release us who are entrapped in the waters of the deep of this cycle. And those who will make it here will be cast into the waters of the deep, where Yahweh will start Beresheeth again. And then they will have an opportunity to be restored, so that every knee will bow, and the sand of the sea, those promises given to Abraham, will eventually come to fruition. cycle after cycle. We don't know how many cycles. From a physical perspective, it's an eternity. The smoke will go up forever, and it's the smoke of a torching furnace of his covenant, doing purification work, refining the gold that cannot be destroyed. It can only be purified.
And then before that fire must be taken out before rains are over.
Yeah. Okay, so that's my 2 cents on that. I don't know if it makes sense or not. Asha, you want to comment on that one?
Nope.
You want to comment on that one, Asha? No?
Not particularly.
Does it make sense?
Yes. I also watched this back. So I see this a second time.
Okay. Anyone else? No, no one. Philip just went to wash his hands quickly. He'll be back in a sec.
Philip, it's Sarah here. Just one thing I don't understand. So if Satan is cast into the lake of fire, is he going to get a second chance? Or
Remember, Satan has a purpose. He's the one who, what do you call it?
He's the sheepdog.
Yeah, he has a purpose.
So, no, I don't think he's got a second chance. It is his kingdom. And he tried to steal the sand of the sea. He tried to steal the promise that was given. And until the point where he's got no one within his kingdom, then he will probably be destroyed. So there's no information on what will happen with Satan other than it's cast back into his kingdom. If you can make the connection with the waters of the deep and the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of the south. But the kingdom within this realm, within our cycle, his kingdom will be destroyed. But think about the previous cycle that we read about in the beginning of Beresheeth. Was there anything given there to us, any detail? We don't have a lot of detail. All we know is that the earth existed, it was covered by water, and according to the symbolism that happened later on in Genesis, where there was a flood of destruction, of the same pattern, I believe there was a flood of destruction and judgment prior to our cycle that started with creation. So whatever existed back then was refined and elevated, and whatever was not is us that are now being refined and elevated, and whoever is going to be left, they're going to be in the next one, which starts with the 8th millennium, and that will be elevated and restored. So that's my connection. And the reason I'm thinking like this is because of the cyclical nature of Yahweh's refining cycles, also because of the promise he gave to Abraham, also because of the verse that we read that the serpent will deceive people and they will be like the sand of the sea, which is the covenant language. That's mean he come and steal, kill, and destroy, want to take people away from Yahweh's presence. And to be separated from Yahweh is a state of death. Death actually means separation. Separation from the source of life. And if you think about the nature of a soul, I believe a soul cannot be destroyed. And if you think about the spiritual being, I don't know if Satan can be destroyed, but he will definitely be separated from Yahweh's people. But there's no detail given to us what happened after this judgment with Satan, other than he will be cast in the lake of fire, which has a similar symbolism as the waters of the deep. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good, thanks.
And the other thing I want to emphasize is the nature of cycles and how things connect with cycles. So if you think about the 7th day, the 8th day is day 1 of a 7-day cycle. If there's a 7th millennium, the 8th millennium is the first millennium of the next cycle. And Yahweh's word is holographic. You see the large in the small and the small in the large. And the patterns always repeat. They're of the same kind because they're in the fingerprints of Yahweh. And his word is eternal, and he will do what he said he will do. And what we read from that verse is, I just want to get back onto that one, that it said that he will not stop. Well, that's the what I get from it. Your treaty with death will be wiped away. Your engagement with death will not stand. When the overwhelming disaster passes by, you will be trampled by it. Each time it passes by, it will take you. So this means that you won't see death. So in this life, when you die, you won't be trampled again in the same way. But in this language here, it means that you will go through it over and over again. And in the context of what we saw last time with brimstone and torture, it's about the presence of Yahweh and about the purification of gold, which is compared to the soul. So Yahweh will not stop refining and purifying until it's 100% pure. That's the nature of him who created us as perfect. We've been defiled, and he's going to restore us and make us whole again. What the detail is, what's going to happen in the 8th cycle, I don't know, because there's no evidence for us to say what it is. I can only extrapolate from what we see here, the patterns we see here in this cycle, making an assumption what will happen in the next cycle, also connecting the cycle of this Torah portion with the next Torah portion and the theme of judgment and destruction, and right after that, creation and restoration. So the cycle continues, and that's the only way that I can see and answer what's in Revelation 22, where there will be people inside the city, and on the outside, there will be people who are still in a leprous state, and they need to be healed from the leprosy. And Yahweh will not stop until he heals everyone, because it's in his nature to save, and it's in his nature to heal. Otherwise, verse 15 would not exist if the lake of fire was the final judgment, where you chuck you into the fire, you see a bit of smoke, and you stop to exist. That's what the atheists believe. They believe when they die, they turn to nothing. And if you believe that with regards to the lake of fire, you've got the same faith building block as an atheist that will make people stop to exist. If that's the case, it's grace to them, because they can do whatever they want. They will burn for a second and no longer exist. If you believe that Yahweh will torture them forever and ever and ever and ever and ever in the presence of the Lamb and his holy angels, it means like it doesn't sit right regarding his character. He doesn't take pleasure in that, and it's not his main purpose as king. He's not the gatekeeper of hell and hell's fire to torture people in his presence forever and ever and ever. So that doesn't sit well either, if you look at his character. So that's why my only explanation is I follow the cycles, I follow the patterns, I extrapolate what I think to safeguard what I believe is holy, is Yahweh's character. We cannot contaminate his character with our misunderstanding, and we need to adhere to the nature of the Hebrew language and apply that through the cyclical patterns and symbolism in order to glean the information from his Torah and from his word, specifically the New Testament that has been defiled by the Catholics. So, yeah. Any other comments or questions?
Hey, Philip. That sort of makes more sense, because I've always kind of believed that, or explained it to people as that the lake of fire was never about eternal torment, except for those who were created to be eternal, like Hasatan and his cronies, and those that threw in their lot, and even at the end of at the judgment, if they continued to throw in their lot, but it still wasn't about eternal judgment for them. It was that purification process, like we go through the fires through life to purify us, and even at the end, if there's what isn't of him gets burnt off, and if there is something of him within you, that goes on to I guess survive, for lack of a better word, you know what I mean? But anything that is not of him in that end judgment gets burnt and burned away. If there's nothing of him, then you all burn. All of you burn. Do you know what I mean? So that sort of adds a little bit more to that, which I'm going to have to think on some more. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Philip, on that point, does that include the Rephaim and the Nephilim that aren't God's creation, that they would get chucked in the lake of fire for eternity?
So I believe anything that is not pure from Yahweh's blueprint will be destroyed by fire. So if there's a hybrid that's been created, that thing will be destroyed. It's not pure, it's not from Yahweh.
Yep, thank you for that.
All right, let's talk about Sukkot. This one is about moving from Yom Kippur to Sukkot. So Yom Kippur is about the fast. And the purpose of this fast is in verse 6, Isaiah 58 verse 6, that says, "Is not the fast that I've chosen to loose the bands of wickedness, to undo the heavy burdens, and to let the oppressed go free, that you break every yoke?" And that sounds like when Yeshua announced himself as Mashiach, he used the same language. He's here to set captives free. And that's the purpose of his death, is to fulfill the Yom Kippur intent, which is a sacrifice. But what's behind the sacrifice is what we read here. This is the work of Mashiach fulfilled by his sacrifice. To loose the bands of the wickedness, to undo heavy burdens, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke. Now, if you think about it, any sinner, let's not talk about Hitler, but anyone left of Hitler or right of Hitler, people sin because they've got some gifts they received from their parents, from their upbringing, from people they mingled with, from stupidity that they engaged with something that caused the bondage, that had a domino effect, and before you know it, they sit up in jail or they killed someone or whatever happened. It is the bondage of this imperfect world that caused someone who once was an innocent baby to become a corrupt criminal that's being locked up. If you think about that, what went wrong to that baby to end up like that with that soul? It's brokenness. It's a burden. It's this imperfect world, this time frame situation, whatever the case might be. We know Yahweh is righteous and fair, and he won't allow anything to come over you that you won't be able to withstand. Now, if you're an innocent baby, you're born into this imperfect world, and as a result of that, the burden was just too heavy, what reward do you get? No, I'm going to burn you forever. No. This poor guy had no chance. He had to carry this heavy burden that broke him, that caused him to make all these mistakes, end up like that. And what we want to do with him is burn him forever. Yahweh is not like that. Yahweh wants to take off the burden and heal, support, restore, teach, bring back whatever's left. He will take the most precious, the most smallest part and bring it back to life and bring it back into beauty. That's the heart of the Father. That's his creative power and his creative nature. He's not a God of destruction. He's not a God that hates, that's angry, who just want to destroy because he feels better when he does that. He's got empathy with us because of our own stupidity. We cause sin to come upon us. And he wants to set us free from our own stupidity because we are our worst enemies. And he feels sorry for you because of that. So that's my 2 cents on that one. And that's why he's the goldsmith. He's not the grim reaper. He's there to sweep up all the little gold filings, all the little things, heat it up, make a little ball of gold, remold it, and make a beautiful ring. So you can put a gemstone in it and wear it. All right, Sukkot. Celebration of Sukkot is a celebration of unification. It's 2 sticks coming together. And not only that, Romans 11 tells us it's going to include the nations. They will be grafted in. And together with these 2 sticks, many nations will come in. That's the intent of the Father. And guess when he said this, it's when Israel totally went astray. He still had a plan to bring them back regardless. He even's got a plan for drunk Ephraim and for stubborn Judah. On Sukkot, there were sacrifices of 70 bulls and 7 goats. Number 70 means nations, and number 7 represents Yahweh's covenant and also his day of rest. The finale of his creation, so to speak. And Sukkot is that celebration. We also see the number 7 repeated 3 times through the themes we touched on. It's the 7th month, the 7th feast, in context of the 7th millennium. Now, when we look at the sacrifices, there were different sacrifices or number of sacrifices done on each day. So I've got day 1 to 7 here, and how many bulls and goats were sacrificed on each day had a significant meaning of the focus of the celebration of that day. So on day 1, which connect to Aleph, we know Aleph is Yoteh Vafe, it's all about Yahweh. 13 bulls were sacrificed on 1 goat. Number 13 automatically 13 attributes of grace. That's the character of the Father. But number 13 is also the word Father, love, and becoming Echad. It's the word Echad. And that's a celebration of becoming one with the Father, who is the Aleph. Day 2 is the Bet. It's all about the house, the household. What do we see? 12 bulls, 12 tribes, 12 disciples, 12 gates into the city. It's all about the household. 12 also means the mountain, to multiply, sheep. Also the word Echad, to love fervently and to be glad. That's a celebration on the 2nd day. Day 3 is the word Gimel. It has to do with Yahweh's Spirit supporting us and helping us to carry the burden. 11 bulls were sacrificed. Number 11 is a celebration of festivals. It means I will praise him, pilgrim festival, good and gold.
Wow.
What's the purpose of the festivals? To purify gold so the gold can be good again, have no impurities. And we are the gold. The festivals are there to purify gold for the purpose of the king. And it's got the Gimel, bearing heavy burdens. The purification of gold is a tough road, but we've got the support of the Spirit. Number 3 is always to do with covenant. So because of the covenant, we have the help of the Spirit to help us through the purification processes so we can be purified through the work of Mashiach and his festivals, and at the end we will praise him for that. Day 4, Dalet, that's the door to get in. Day 4 is also the work of Mashiach. They sacrificed 10 bulls. Number 10 means cut through, to divide, and it has to do with the cutting of the covenant with Abraham. So it's a celebration of the covenant. And as a result of that, you get united, which is ichad again, softness, bosom, celerity, united, and exalted. I've got it united 12, twice. Exalted is about the elevation from the physical into the spiritual, and that is to enter through the doorway, who is Mashiach, because of the covenant he cut with Abraham. And we now, at the bosom of the Father, he's nurturing us, and we are one with him. Day 5, number is the letter Hey, which is light, truth. It's also the breath, the Ruach. And number 9, they sacrificed 9 bulls. And that is celebrating the harvest. Number 9 means to come in, to enter in, the apple of my eye, to rise up, to grow up, and shouts of joy. Number 6, day 6 is the Vav, that's man. They sacrificed 8 bulls. 8 is the letter Chet, that means life. That's the life that needs to be nurtured, that precious gold that you want to refine. Number 8, Gematria, means birth. At that time, entrance, coming in, entering, fearing, being anxious, be careful, be concerned, move gently, glide over nipple, breast, love, and to love. That's the birth process that's embodied within the number 8. And that's what the whole process is about. The whole process of refinement is you start off being in a terrified state, being anxious and all that. But the end goal is to come in and then to be loved by Yahweh and be nurtured by him. Day 7 is the letter Zion. Zion means sword. It's also his word, his protection against the enemy. Number 7 is also his day of rest, his Sabbath, the climax of his creation. And number 7 is a celebration of Sabbath. It links to fish, coriander, which represents manna. So on the Sabbath you get manna, the manna you find in his Torah, which are the Torah cycle or the Torah portions we do.
Still picking up manna every day.
We pick up manna every week. Every week we've got a topic. And eventually it will lead to rest, but we are being trained as troops or soldiers in order to fish people out of this sea or the ocean of the nations. So that's a beautiful picture of the symbolism of the bulls. Now the bull was sacrificed as a ulah offering. Ulah offering is normally a sacrifice where you burn everything. The priest or no one got anything out of it to celebrate or to eat.
It was not a barbecue.
It's not a barbecue, it's an act of worship. The goat was a sin offering. So the one is for worship, and the one is to allow you to worship where the blood will cover you, so you can come into the presence and worship him and bow your knee before him. So that's a beautiful picture that just harmonizes with what we discussed today. Interesting facts about Sukkot. I already mentioned 777. 7 festivals, the 7th of the full moon, or the 7th full moon, the 7th month, and the feast is a duration of 7 days, and it's symbolic of the 7th millennium. Number 7 also is the final of the creation cycle, and it connects the first Torah, the first Torah portion with this last Torah portion as well, through the idea of the cycle. Number 8, or the 8th day, that's the day after the 7th day festival of Sukkot, which is Shimchat Torah, the turning back of the Torah, and that reinstates the connection between Deuteronomy that we discussed today and the book of Beresheeth. And if you take the last word or the last phrase of this Parashah and the first one, and you connect it, you make a sentence of it. He said, in the presence of Israel, Yahweh created the heavens and the earth.
Say that again. If you take the last word of this Torah
portion, which is in the presence of Israel,
and the first word of the first
Genesis 1 verse 1, in the beginning Yahweh created the heavens and the earth. So in the presence of Israel, Yahweh created in the beginning the heavens and the earth.
Amazing.
So Israel existed prior to creation, hence the idea of the cycle. And what will happen in the 8th millennium? We will be Israel. In our presence, Yahweh will create the heavens and the earth, which is the next cycle. And that's just a interesting Hebraic little gem. Different names of Sukkot. It's called the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles. It's called the Great Feast or the Last Feast. It's called the Feast of Joy, the Festival of Lights, the Feast of Ingathering, the Feast of Dedication, and the Feast of the Nations. You'll see the Feast of Dedication and the Festival of Lights is also the name of Hanukkah. And that connection is because Hanukkah is a delayed Sukkot. Hanukkah is not a feast on its own.
It's not Jewish Christmas.
Yeah, and the story they created with the 8-day oil, whatever, that's not true. That only existed, I don't know how many years after the actual event. The main theme of Hanukkah is the rededication of the temple, which always happened on a Sukkot. That's when when Solomon dedicated his temple as well. Sukkot is a celebration of the marriage feast. It represents the chuppah. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because we had Passover, which is the first part of the covenant, marriage covenant, where you make the covenant, and then the last one is you gather the bride, and you take it to the house or the booth, which is built onto the house of the father. So it's all about the completion of that marriage covenant, which is Sukkot. Solomon's temple was dedicated on Sukkot. Mary said Hanukkah is a delayed Sukkot. Sukkot will be the dedication of the third temple and will also be the dedication of the new temple or the new Jerusalem, which we find in Revelation and in Zechariah. Some believe that John the Baptist was born on Passover, which is actually scriptural. 6 months later, Yeshua was born, and that gives the timeline of Sukkot. Yeshua's transfiguration was on Sukkot with the symbolism of the booths they wanted to build for Yeshua, Moses, and Elijah. That happened on Mount Hermon. The 7th millennium is also the 7th year or the 7th 1,000-year Sukkot, which we found last week in the concept of forest cities and the dwelling in makeshift homes or cities that come from forests, whatever, because everything will be destroyed after the Great Tribulation. Sukkot is celebrated in the new kingdom, and he will drink his fourth cup, which he didn't drink the first time, which he will only drink in the kingdom. That cup will be filled by the wine that's produced by the winepress, and he will drink that fourth cup in the 8th millennium on a Passover, which I think is the marriage feast of the Lamb, which we will be part of after everything's being made pretty. All right, Sukkot, the feast of ingathering. This is where the fruit harvest come in, the final ingathering. They call it Hag HaAsif, the festival of ingathering, and it's found in Exodus 23:16. You shall celebrate the feast of ingathering at the end of the year when you gather in your labors out of the field. Now, this is also where the American people get the idea of Thanksgiving. It's the same festival, and its roots are in the feast of Sukkot. Sukkot is all about the producing of the produce of the field. We connected the field to Esau and the people of the field, people in the world. So it's all about the fruit that comes in. And the link we make is that we have the means to bring people in from the field through the fruit of the Spirit that crown us with the ability to be judges, to rule over nations, but also in this time period to have the gifts so that we can teach people Yahweh's Torah and bring them into the kingdom without religion. This feast is also prophetic of the nations as a result of the fruit of the Spirit, the outpouring of the Spirit on all flesh that you read about in Joel 2 verse 23 and also in Acts 2 verse 17, where he will pour out his Spirit on all people. What do you think is the purpose of that, pouring out the Spirit? I know for the gifts you need that to function within a tabernacle as the kingdom of priests. You need the anointing, but he said he will pour it out on all flesh. And I don't think all will be priests. I think it might be to do with the purification. of the Spirit, and the regeneration or the refinement of the old nature into a new nature. That's done by the work of the Spirit, and that's why the Spirit needs to be poured upon them. It's like pouring hot metal on you, because you need the heat in order to change the nature. Sukkot is also the Feast of the Nations, and that's where we are to gather in the nations. That's one of the reasons why I don't believe in the rapture, because when you read the prophecies, you read Revelation, you read Zechariah and all that, and even during the tribulation, if people come to faith during the Great Tribulation, which I think is the extension of grace to people, and there's no one to disciple them because they're all raptured, what will happen to them? And if you look at the pattern of people working in the fields and there's a harvest that's ripe, don't you think there will be a ripe harvest during the Great Tribulation as well? Is there only a ripe harvest prior to the Great Tribulation? Let's bring it closer to home. In this time period that we're in, people at work, they're still atheists. They still do what they do. They're just angry or afraid. No one came running and said, "Oh, teach me about your God." No one. There's no harvest yet. They need to go through a greater time of tribulation than a few lockdowns in order to come running and grab your TT and be really afraid.
Do you see here and there people?
Yeah, there's here and there, but there's not a great harvest yet. So imagine we're going to be out of here, let's say at the end of this week, or maybe before the next Passover, we get raptured. Who's going to be there to help those people?
Yes.
Because Ephraim is lying drunk at the feet of the women at the well. Yeah, so it doesn't make sense if you think about the doctrines that's out there to cause people to be lukewarm, and not to think about that my salvation is not for myself. It's not a selfish act. It's for the salvation of others. I need to help people to come to faith. And that's why I study the Torah. That's why I live my life, so people can come to me and ask me questions, and I can lead them to Yahweh and basically connect the scripture with the news events that's out there, so they can see whatever's in the Bible is actually happening. So yes, I think God is alive, and I need to serve Him. Galatians 3 verse 8 to 9 says, also the Tanakh, foreseeing that Yahweh would consider the Gentiles righteous when they live by trusting and being faithful, told the good news to Abraham in advance by saying, in connection with you, all the nations will be blessed. So then, those who rely on trusting and being faithful are blessed along with Abraham, also trusted and was faithful. For in union with the Messiah, you are all children of Yahweh through the trusting faithfulness, because as many of you have been immersed in Messiah, have clothed yourself with Messiah, in whom there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave or freeman, neither male or female. In union with Messiah Yeshua, you are all one, or echad. Also, if you belong to Messiah, you are seed of Abraham and heirs according to the promise.
Amen.
So this whole thing started with Abraham and the cutting of the covenant and the furnace walking in between the pieces. And that's the connection with the fiery law and the Torah. So if you say, I'm a child of Abraham, I'm of the seed of Abraham, and you're not standing on the foundation of Torah, you are misleading yourself by believing that. And you are believing the false prophets that tell you stories that we read about earlier. And you need to repent from your religion and come back to faith and the faithfulness of Abraham. And I deliberately changed the words here because they just use the word faith. It's not faith, it's faithfulness. Abraham received truth or a revelation. He acted on that truth, and by being faithful in the truth, he was regarded as being righteous. So we are now being revealed what the Torah is, what the truth is. Now I need to be faithful in the Torah, and that is declared righteousness. As part of the revelation of Torah is the revelation of Mashiach. I need to be faithful in believing and supporting the idea that Yeshua is the Mashiach, and that's counted to me as righteousness. It's all in one. It's not this or the other. It's all the one. The one foundation is building upon another. And the original covenant was given to a man and a family. It was extended to a household through Jacob. Then it was extended to a nation through Moses. Then it's extended to nations through Yeshua, so that all the families of the earth can be blessed. The covenant is the original covenant. There's no new covenant. It's new people accessing the same covenant. That's why it's new to you. Just like the moon, it's not the new moon. It's new to you because you are trapped in time. It's the same moon.
Amen.
All right, that's all I have, folks. Any comments or questions?
Okay. Hi. I'm just it's really amazing because this morning Tammy and I got the book of Enoch out and we were reading that, and it was all about the fire and the about the columns of fire and the deep abyss. Are you familiar with the book of Enoch?
Yeah.
Yeah. So and also the 7 stars are mentioned a lot, which you mentioned in the last few parashahs back, you know, with Pleiades and that. So yeah, it was just amazing because talks a lot about the abyss, and it says that they'll be cast into the abyss of complete condemnation, and they shall cover their jaws with rough stones, as Yahweh of hosts commanded. And yeah, so it's just incredible, the synchronicity of this Torah portion and what we were reading beforehand.
Yeah.
But I you know, like, it would be good if to really go through that to help understand the scripture, because it opens it up much more.
Yeah.
Yeah, to connect the dots, to fill in the missing pieces.
Yes.
Now, the
Yeah.
Gematria helps a lot with that, to connect little things that's in between the dots. But as you say, we've got the book of Enoch, and if you connect little phrases and language to and bring it in, you get a bit more context.
Yeah, it just grows. You just grows it, because it explains about the abyss and what the abyss is, where it's in our.
It's just filling in. Yeah, it's not contradictory.
No. But you're talking about the seas. I've been looking into the maritime law that apparently we are under at the moment. And that's the law of the sea. We're not under the law of the land.
Tell us more about that, because I'm not familiar with that.
Okay. So it's basically the law of maritime law is actually contract law.
Yeah.
So it's connected to the beast system, the Babylonian system of buying and selling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so when you go into court, you go to dock.
Yep.
That's because you're a vessel.
When you got born, you had a birth certificate.
Yeah, you get a.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So.
Oh, wow.
It's very interesting, because it's that, just as Philip said, that like Hashatan's taken the sands of the sea and taken it for himself. Well, so have he done that with the seas as well?
My
You know.
goodness. So, Sue, can you maybe send us some more information about or regarding the maritime law that we are
Sure.
under? I've
Yeah.
heard that before, but I didn't go into depth about
Yeah.
it.
It's really coming to the fore now. It's like everything's converging, and yeah. So I'll send you that info.
Yeah, that would be great. And we can forward that to Harry and Estelle if
Yeah.
you want. Mm.
Yeah, I also know that they say you're not born, you birth,
Yes,
like a ship.
Yeah, you get a birth certificate.
yes.
You
They
birth.
use spelling as a spell, in a sense.
That's why they call it spelling.
Yeah. They use language to confuse and confound us. But once you know what they're doing, it's so much easier just to go back to the simplicity of Yahweh's word and not get confused by their language.
Mm.
Yeah.
So we're merchants on the sea, and they use us to make money.
Yes,
Because
that's
you're
right.
not a human, you're a
Commodity.
entity.
Yeah, a commodity. And that's why it says in Revelation that they trade in the bodies and souls of men. Because
Yeah.
apparently I know that in America, I don't know here in Australia, but their birth certificates are actually traded on the stock exchange.
Well, I think it's all over the world.
Yeah, it's all over. Yeah. It's the same system.
The same system.
Yeah, there's more videos about it. I don't know if it still exists. It's about the strawman.
Yes, the straw man. That's right. The fictional and the fiction, paper fiction,
Yeah.
Mm.
and not the living man or the living woman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mate, I wouldn't leave your skateboard there because cars drive through there. They might run over it and you'll end up losing it, darling. Yeah, I know. It'll be a sad day for you. Sorry.
Anyone else? All right, so I will close in prayer and then we can let you go. Thank you, Father, for this wonderful opportunity to discuss your word. Father, I ask that you be with us, you help us to prepare and accept the truth that we need to know for this time that we're in. Also help us to be strong, to be men and women of faith, so we can stand on your Torah, we can have your fiery law in our right hands as we stand up and be part of your army to fight against the powers of darkness that's emerging amongst us. And Father, also help us to bring peace wherever we can, and also the message of peace and the message of truth, which is the message of Mashiach. I ask you that you give us the ability and people to talk to, send people across our path so we can enlighten them according to your will. I ask it all in the mighty name of Yeshua Mashiach. Amen.
Amen. Oh, Philip, by the way, have you seen the eruption on the Canary Islands? Have you seen any footage of that?
No.
No? That it's absolutely incredible what's going on over there. And when I was reading Enoch on Enoch 18, it talks about columns of fire. And over on the Canary Islands, they've got about 14 columns of fire going off.
What?
Yeah, you should have a look. It's just,
Did you say 300 meters into
He
the air?
said all those links.
300 meters into the air of lava and columns of fire. And yeah, and it's really interesting because I'm thinking, like it's the Canary Islands, and they talk about the canary in the coal mine being like a warning.
Wow.
And I think also songbird is also a canary, isn't it?
A songbird.
Yeah, and songbird is connected to ripple, and ripple is connected to the mark of the beast, which is a new money system.
It's a movie.
Did you say ripple?
Yeah,
Oh,
songbird is a token that
yes.
contains the movie Songbird that they give to people who's got Ripple XRP, which is a new money system.
Right. Wow.
System.
Yes.
And if you put that in the Gematria, it's actually called the mark of the beast.
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. The earth is groaning. The earth is
And
groaning.
Ripple also have the implants already connected to their networks to buy and sell with a chip.
Oh, really? Already?
Yeah, and Ripple has got, I don't know how many contracts with world banks already in place. And they recently did one between us and Britain.
Yes. Is it? Oh, okay. Well, that probably explains the deal, the treaty we've just experienced.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, everything's coming together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because not only is the Canary Islands erupting in immense amounts of lava and fire, but so is Iceland. And and that you should get onto that. That's awesome.
Where do you find it though? Where do you find this?
I don't know. I just come across it. Probably because I'm interested in earthquakes and volcanoes.
Geoscience.com a website to follow.
Yeah, for the earthquakes, but and also Dutch Sense. I get a lot of information from him. But the videos, I go to Gutentog, which is GUTN and space TOG, and he goes up every day and videos it. But they also had about 14 vents open, and they were having 1,000-foot high columns of lava. And both of those islands, like Iceland and the Canaries, are either side of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge.
Wow.
So it's very interesting watching the earth groaning, because I've never seen anything like it. It's even probably as bad, like Hawaii, when Hawaii went off on the other side of the world. Yeah. So anyway, I'll send all the info to you.
Yeah.
Please, that would be great. And then we will forward that to you as well, Harry and Estelle. Yeah?
Sorry, I missed that. We've got a car going past. Truck.
No, Letty will forward it to the other people.
Thank you, Letty.
Okay, see you.
All right. See you
Okay,
guys.
shalom. Shabbat shalom.
Enjoy.
Yeah, you too.
See you. Bye.
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 Bye, Sefer. Thank you.